Hello. I'm going to talk about the arrest of a reporter in Seattle at an unspecified time because the report is in keeping with the usual standards fairly common among newspapers of the left, which it's the Independent in this case, but it's not seen fit to give the exact time or even the place of the incident, except that it was in Seattle, and it was during a Black Lives Matter demo. So it must have been fairly recently. Apparently, Mr. Buncombe here, this chap, was arrested for failure to disperse, which is a particularly ironic charge considering that he was standing on his own. And you can see it's just one of those cooked up charges the police use when they can't think of anything else. Now, I just want to mention something. I was struck by the similarity of the name of this fellow, he's called Andrew Buncombe, to the name Bunbury, a character invented by Oscar Wilde in his play The Importance of Being Earnest. Bunbury, in turn, was a character invented by one of the two main protagonists of the play, in this case, Algernon Moncrief, the non-existent Bunbury, whose frequently recurring bouts of illness furnished Moncrief with the ideal excuses to get out of otherwise unavoidable social engagements. And since The Importance of Being Earnest is, at root, a play about snobism, being from the right family, carrying with you the correct labels and all the hypocrisy of the foregoing, then the closeness of Mr. Buncombe's name to poor old Bunbury was an amusement too close for me to ignore. So let's get started with the Independent. I want you to notice some of the wording here. Boris Johnson urged to raise freedom of press concerns with Trump after arrest of the Independent's chief US correspondent. Long-serving reporter was shackled and put in prison uniform during 6-hour ordeal. Okay, so we have here a long-serving reporter. Long-serving means he's a solid character. Reporter means he should be afforded freedom and he's a solid citizen. He was shackled, which is a very pejorative word for being handcuffed, and put in prison uniform, oh how demeaning, during a 6-hour ordeal. So that was something really nasty, physically and mentally, that happened to him. I'm pointing this out because these words will come up a bit later on as quite an important example of how you report a reporter being arrested if you're on the side of that reporter. Boris Johnson has been urged to raise concerns. Buncombe was arrested while covering a Black Lives Matter protest in Seattle. The experienced reporter is not only long-serving, he's experienced. This is a solid citizen. Was handcuffed, shackled and placed in a red prison uniform, detained for more than 6 hours in a police cell. And the incident was described by the Foreign Office as very concerning. And it's true, American police do get heavy-handed often. And it is true, this should not have happened to Andrew Buncombe. That's absolutely true. I'm not arguing that that this should have happened to him. I am arguing that it shouldn't have happened to him. What I'm going to go on to talk about is how it happened to somebody else. And they didn't raise a word about it. He now faces a charge of failure to disperse, which carries a maximum penalty of 364 days and a $5,000 fine. despite having been alone at the time of his arrest. So they point out he wasn't a vicious crowd, he wasn't getting in the way, he showed them his press credentials, and he acted properly, as a journalist should. The Society of Editors has also weighed in on the side of Mr. Buncombe and called for the Prime Minister to raise concerns about the treatment of journalists by American police. So they're very angry about the way American police have acted towards a journalist on his own, reporting on something nasty going on. The BBC's long-serving World Affairs editor John Simpson described Buncombe's account of his ordeal as devastating. Let's see, the BBC's North America editor said the incident was hair-raising, disturbing and depressing. They're all agreeing with each other, and I agree with them. Ian Murray, Executive Director of the Society of Editors, called on Johnson to raise issues of press freedom and the safety of journalists. Oh, he said that the Seattle case followed the arrest of UK national photojournalist Adam Gray, who was thrown to the ground by police, restrained and handcuffed as he chronicled protests in New York City earlier this year. Of course, the British police would never do anything like this, would they? So the Independent doesn't have to call them to task. Journalists need protection to carry out their vital work to defend democracy wherever they may be working, says the chairman of the Society of Editors, Adam Gray. Okay, oh, and this is Mr. Buncombe's mugshot. He looks well pissed off. Okay, Christian Broughton. I wonder if you have to have a name beginning with B and to contain letters that aren't pronounced to work in the Independent. Well, it's just a thought. He says, as a global news organisation, the Independent has correspondents based permanently in countries with poor records for press freedom, and we frequently send reporters into conflict zones. So when the phone rings to tell you a journalist has been arrested, you don't imagine that the correspondent in question would be in the United States. Andy is an experienced and highly respected reporter. Look, it doesn't matter if he's experienced or a novice. It doesn't matter if he's highly respected or not. The important word here is reporter, reporting on the news. So long as you're doing it within a legal framework, then you should have the protection of anybody who is interested in the freedom of the press. Let's have a look at this. This is the Independent reporting on the arrest of Tommy Robinson for breaching the peace outside court, a single man on his own on the public highway. By the way, reading on his phone from the BBC website. Well, I was talking about Victorian hypocrisy, wasn't I? Let's have a look at how they word their report of Robinson's arrest. The far-right activist showed men entering Leeds Crown Court in a live stream on Facebook, where he claimed to be reporting, scare quotes, on the case. Robinson was arrested, cuffed, taken before a judge, charged, convicted and sent to jail. I don't know how long it took, but I reckon it must have been a couple of hours. And he was then sent to jail for 13 months. And his ordeal was a month in solitary confinement, being bullied by the other prisoners who wanted to kill him, and on a starvation diet, before it was decided that the processes which had been used to put him in that position were illegal and he was released. Where was the outrage from The Independent about the illegality of Tommy Robinson's arrest, irrespective of what you think of his opinions. He is a journalist. He was a journalist. That is, you don't have to have qualifications to be a journalist. We are not in a country where you get a certificate from the government allowing you to be a journalist. Anyone can be a journalist if they report on the news, and that's what he was doing. Somewhere in here, they also talk about his history. Oh yes, here we are. He was on Twitter, but he was permanently banned. He co-founded the English Defence League, has been arrested numerous times during demonstrations and at fights between football fans. Oh, you find me a working class kid that hasn't at least had a brush with the police during a football match. As well as being jailed for mortgage fraud in 2014, and we all know that that was a cooked up charge as well. He attempted to found a British branch of the German anti-Islam group Pegida, became a correspondent for Canadian right-wing website Rebel Media. Right-wing website Rebel Media, who's being run by a Jew. And they accuse his posts for radicalising the Finsbury Park attacker, Darren Osborne. He had no connection with Osborne whatsoever. No connection at all. But they make him responsible for Osborne's actions anyway. And then they say he's friendly with the ethno-nationalist Generation Identity movement, whose leaders have been prevented from entering the UK. Now that's rather amusing, because I did a video in which I went through the letter refusing the Generation Identity founders entry, and it was an illiterate letter, obviously written by somebody who hadn't been to school very often. But none of that is important to The Independent. This one, though, is. This is a long-serving reporter, and he should be accorded press freedom. Well, basically, he's one of The Independent's reporters, and so he has to be given all the freedom that a newspaper reporter should have. But what The Independent is not taking into consideration is the fact that it's Tommy Robinson's arrest, which is paving the way for this. You can't have one without the other. Oscar Wilde had a run-in with British judicial hypocrisy as well, to his cost, and no doubt his case was reported by outraged British newspapers in similar ways to that in which they reported on the Tommy Robinson case. Meanwhile, the hypocrisy with which Wilde accused them is alive and well in The Independent and in any of The Independent's friends, colleagues, other newspapers and establishment voices. Why don't you treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of promotional merchandising? The Grannyopteryx t-shirt or the Granbo mug, which comes in 2 flavours, with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. And whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.